Welcome back. This is part 7 of Sibylla's story. Let's continue the journey with the new chapter, titled True Heroism.
Such let my life be here, not marked by noise, but by success alone, not known by bustle, but by useful deeds. Quiet and gentle, clear and fair as light, yet full of its all-penetrating power, its silent but resistless influence, wasting no needless sound, yet ever working, hour after hour, upon a needy world. H. Vollmar. The last day of the year had come, but such a struggle and event as it brought with it none of the preceding 364 had witnessed. The dunes looked around in surprise, rubbing with one hand the snow from their eyes and thinking summer had returned again. They could not imagine why there was such a concourse of people moving to and fro. What had occurred in this quiet spot of the world that it had been transformed into such a place of excitement? Nothing had happened as yet, but on the morrow Martin's father had decided to give a festival in honor of his son's return, such as had never been witnessed on sea or land. All the people round about should participate in it. Great and small should rejoice with him. There was no public house large enough to accommodate everybody, but this did not trouble Herr Niederog's mind. Did not the sea spread itself out to unseen width and arch her bosom with ice as firm as a ship's deck? Did it not sparkle and beam in dazzling whiteness? On the ice, then, they would go, play, eat, drink, skate, sled, all partake of the joy which the father entertained. Great preparations were begun. Herr Niederog hastened them as much as possible, for while the ice now stood firm and hard as marble, the banks here and there began to give signs that probably in several days water would flow between the mainland and the ice plain. Today all was safe and beautiful. The finest weather greeted the festival, to which everybody was invited. Oh, how the children anticipated with longing eyes the preparations of the refreshments yonder in a gaily decorated tent. For once, noontime came too late, but a half-hour after, no one was seen in the houses. Old and young were out. Those who could not play and skate looked merrily on, and not a single person remained behind save the solitary invalid of the village, Frau Eriksson. Karen would have gladly remained with her, but being Martin's betrothed, she was one of the chief personages of the festival. At length she too was gone, and the paralytic one lay in a position which enabled her to look out on the sea and at least share with her eyes in the general enjoyment. Had Ingeborg been here, she would have remained at the bedside, as such pleasures were indifferent to her. But she was in Berlin, having written a few lines to Mother Esther after her arrival, to the effect that she had reached there safely, had seen Wolf, he was no longer ill, and should soon return with her. Further, Mother Esther knew nothing. Quietly she lay there, thinking, recalling the occurrences of her life. With what pleasure she would have witnessed her happy daughter on the arm of the joyful bridegroom. Then her thoughts reverted to Berlin. Her beloved son was there, and she could not help him. How gladly she would have hastened to him, embraced and rescued him. But alas, she was lying here, helpless. Through the clear air came shouts of laughter, and Mother Esther looked out on the gay picture in the distance, but it was too far away to recognize anyone. Much easier could she read the beautiful inscription on the wall, which as a child had been deciphered so difficultly, and which had silently witnessed all the joy and sorrow of her life. It had stood there as long as the house, and would accompany Karen also through her new life, helping her to bear the good and evil days which might recur to her in this little abode. In storm and tempests high, great God, protect my life, and from my little home keep distant rage and strife. Let angels hover near, then shall we never fear. Several hours passed in this way. Early evening came, and moonlight fell on the pretty picture of merrymakers. Suddenly, as Frau Eriksson looked over the sea, she perceived a little white cloud rising near the horizon. It gave her unspeakable anxiety, as she understood so well weather signals. In about an hour there would be a frightful storm that would disturb the water, cause the ice to be flooded, and all would be lost. "Oh God," she thought, "is there not one among them wise enough to interpret that little peculiar cloud that will soon become monstrous and bring destruction in its path?" No, all are happy, living only in the present enjoyment. How well she knew this class of people. Quiet, thoughtful, difficult to arouse to mirth, but doing everything heartily and thoroughly, work or play. No one would dream of danger, and suddenly it will come upon them all. Mother Esther's solicitude gave vent in a loud cry, which was followed by successive ones. Alas, her shrieks did not reach beyond the little room. They were all in vain. No head turned away from the strand, no cessation of pleasure, and the cloud grew larger and larger. "There is no time to lose. Many lives hang on your efforts, thou poor lame woman." She looked once more out of the window. The moonlight threw its pale beams over all, and only showed to her more clearly the gathering blackness. Now life hangs on a moment to attract these merry unfortunates. Then a fearful conclusion. The power of the will controls the body. Frau Eriksson, who but a few minutes before had been unable to stir, crept out of bed, crawled to the stove on hands and knees. God be thanked, there is still some fire there. Seizing a brand, she threw it on her bed, and in a moment it was wrapped in flames. Now she must reach a place of safety herself. With superhuman effort, she gained the door, and then a few feet from her home, she saw the red flames leap from the window and seize the straw on the roof. Only partially clothed, she knelt in the snow, her whole spiritual strength concentrated in her eyes. She gazed intently hither and thither. Yes, yes, now they see the clear firelight, and in wild haste all rush to the land. Then the wind sprang up and accelerated the destruction of the widow's dwelling, and still more the approach of the villagers, who now recognized their double peril. The sky had grown dark, the ice cracked and snapped, the wind has become a storm, flapping the flame tongues like whips, but in the wild escaping, all there. And as the last foot presses the strand, the ice breaks, and the furious waters rush and roar as if in rage that their victims have escaped. All are saved, every one. Martin and Karen outran the others. They were the first to discover the motionless form of their mother, prostrate on the ground. Nothing could be saved from the house. The situation was grasped by all, and one feeling animated every heart. At the same time, from another direction, with flying feet, came Wolf and Ingeborg. They had seen the light of the fire and had hastened there as rapidly as the approaching storm. They do not ask what has happened. The condition of Mother Esther permits no time for questions. "Take her immediately to my house," says Ingeborg. "No, to mine, is heard on all sides. "I have plenty of room, and it is not far," says Ingeborg firmly. Everyone offers to carry tenderly the old mother. Every hand would render some immediate service. Every eye would see her. Every lip would bless her. Now she lies feeble and pale in Ingeborg's comfortable bed and warm room. All signs of lethargy have flown from Wolf, and as yet he does not grasp the situation, as his professional skill is wholly claimed. But there is nothing to hope for. A second paralytic stroke has affected the whole body. A third will not be long delayed, and it will end her life.
But Mother Esther is not unconscious. She looks up and recognizes Wolf, Karen, Ingeborg, and Martin. Through the open door many enter. She knows them all and receives their grateful thanks for their life and her love. Many eyes are wet with tears. Many hard palms press the stiffened hands of the old mother. She looks up so inquiringly that, comprehending her expression, they tell her all are returned safely and that she has rescued them. Tears of joy fill her eyes as she seeks to read the faces of Karen and Martin. She had destroyed their home, and now her daughter is portionless. They embrace her assuringly, while Herr Niederog advances and says, "Make no apology, Mother Esther. We owe our lives to you, and I will establish Karen as a princess." "I will also contribute my share," exclaims an old seaman. "But for you I should be in a watery grave." "The poor girl has lost mother and home for us," added another. "A shame to any who will not do what he can." At length the room is cleared. Wolf requests rest and quiet for his mother, he alone remaining at her side until she fell asleep, when he went out to learn the particulars of the affair. Without words, without ostentation, a simple old woman had done a heroic deed, which was crowned with success. With her own life she had purchased many, and yet there lay upon her face an expression which seemed to ask forgiveness for having destroyed her child's home. Wolf heard the story of the day, and yet this faithful mother he had overlooked and neglected, had given her anxious care instead of joy, and had imagined himself to be better than she. Youthful confidence in unbridled strength on the one side, selfish compliance to every allurement and impression on the other side, had engendered the bitter disappointment in a struggle that had not been able to discriminate between the real and the unreal. Made recreant to his faith, disappointed in his love, he had witnessed the downfall of everything that had at first seemed beautiful and only worthy of attainment. The usual currents in which he moved had shown their inner falsity and ended in a precipice. Finally, he was weary of the chase. He had recognized his want of decision, he who had desired so much and attained so little. But his strength to resist was broken. Knowledge and theory, words and even experience could not help him. Only deeds and life. Here was a deed. It thrilled him. God be thanked, it created dissension within him. And now his heart was a purgatory in which good and evil struggled for the mastery. What would he not give now to have his mother again? He needed her more than ever. "Mother, leave me not," he cried. "Alas, that I followed the false thirst that enticed me from this peaceful calling here. What do I bring as a compensation?" Mother Esther slept long. Even the raging of a furious storm without did not disturb her. When the angel Gabriel shall sound the trump at the day of judgment, she will awake out of her sleep and hear the voice which called, "Lazarus, come forth," say to her, "Well done, good and faithful servant. Thou hast been faithful over a few things. I will make thee ruler over many things. Enter thou into the joy of thy Lord." Her funeral was like that of a princess and a heroine. As in the few days previous all had gone forth to the merrymaking, so now no one remained behind from this festival of sorrow. Wolf stood by the open grave and looked into the narrow place which should henceforth be his mother's resting place. What equipment had he, with all his thinking and striving for eternal life? She had never aspired to do great things, and yet she had accomplished the noblest. He, whose ambition would lead him to bless the whole world with startling effect, would he be mourned as a benefactor like this one? Wolf was deeply moved, and these days of heaviness continued their work as they led him to contemplate the months and years of his early life. The corn was laid in the earth. "Karen, Wolf," said Ingeborg several days later, "your mother was also my mother. We are brother and sister. This house belongs to me. It is large and empty. For my sake, remain here." "We will thankfully accept your kind and generous offer, at least for a time," they both replied. So the three remained together, and faithful Johanna occupied a mother's place among them.
It was decided that Karen and Martin should be married here, and the wedding should be a quiet one, for no grass yet sprang from Mother Esther's grave. But all the rich love and sympathy that the bride received from the villagers on her wedding day, was it not typical of the more beautiful flowers springing and growing from that suggestive spot?
This marks the end of chapter 21. We now move into the next chapter of Sibylla's story, titled In the Wilderness. Happy places have grown holy. If ye went where once ye went, only tears would fall down slowly, as at solemn sacrament. Merry books once read for pastime, if ye dared to read again, only memories of the last time would swim darkly up the brain. Mrs. E.B. Browning. A landscape so golden and bright spreads out before our gaze, it would seem that there were no sorrow in the world. We are at Larkow, the residence of Herr Bolton. It is the wonderfully beautiful month of May. Birds sing, flowers bloom. Heart, poor heart, bloomest thou? Sibylla had dreary months in the retrospect. When her husband brought her here, during this severe winter, the icicles hung from the roof of their dwelling 24 inches in depth. When her gaze rested on the vast snowfield, upon which here and there black crows searched eagerly for food, she closed her eyes. Everything was harmonious, without all frozen, within all frozen. Her husband was indeed no sun whose mild, patient beams endeavored to thaw this frigidity. The death of Lady von Herbig had somewhat calmed him, but he found it necessary to recall it forcibly in order to justify the sorrow of his wife. That Sibylla was even more buried than her mother never entered his mind. She certainly ought to be very glad to enter here as mistress, and he wished she would relieve the dreariness a little for him and permit herself to be admired in society. It was very unacceptable to him that she did not do the former, and very disagreeable that she made her mourning a pretext for avoiding the latter. She had too much intuition to be deceived in her expectations concerning Herr Bolton. She only desired one thing, and that was to be left free and alone. That her duties to fulfill never occurred to her. It was enough, she thought, if she outwardly performed the obligations as mistress of the house, and if she were as little possible annoyed by his presence. Thus the winter months had passed, monotonously and joylessly. Herr Bolton had shortened them by frequent journeys to Berlin. Sibylla employed her pencil, drew and practiced music, but art did not exert over her its former attraction and power. This was unfortunate. Besides, conscience would not remain silent, but constantly reiterated that her life was more useless to others than that of her humblest maidservant. But she desired no other life, only to live and satisfy self. Did life satisfy? In bitter mockery came the reply from her lips. Her heart leapt and cried aloud for happiness, but happiness only turned its back upon her and would not be allured. Lost, forever lost. Now spring had come. The sun shone, the ice melted, and Sibylla had always been affected by nature. A rainy, gloomy day made her melancholy. A bright, sunny one had an enlivening influence. Her natural gaiety returned, and the servants wondered to see their mistress so pleasant, while her husband emerged from his pouts in order to sun himself in the beams of her wife's amiability. Sibylla was an accomplished horsewoman, and it pleased Herr Bolton to show his wife all his fields and meadows, which were numerous and varied, if not very beautiful. At first, Sibylla rode out merely for the sake of the exercise. When she sat on a horse, there was a sense of freedom which her lively nature enjoyed.
but gradually it became a pleasure to see the possessions which her husband pointed out with so much pride, and in time she began to be interested in them. Her husband now had something to talk about. They were mutually thawed, and, if only on the surface, there was a step forward taken. Who would not rather see a cheerful face near than one of discontent? Who would not strive to please when she sees its beneficial result on another? This feeling came over Sibylla. Happy she could not be, but now she desired to make her husband and those around her so. She would strive through the morning door of the beautiful after true nobility and the faithful performance of duty, onward and upward to perfection. Aesthetic culture should become the foundation of ethics. The effort to make her husband happy, which she had hitherto neglected, she would now consider a paramount duty, and thus reach peace for herself. If one only learn to press the hand upon one's own heart, the exercise will not be too difficult. Everybody met her halfway more. Her husband treated her to discussions of his darling art. Was it not easy to converse upon sheep-raising and the manufacture of beet sugar? One evening, Herr Bolton returned from a business trip of several days to Berlin. Sibylla welcomed him pleasantly, although his absence was not at all irksome to her. "I have 2 items of news for you," he said. "Guess." Sibylla begged for their communication. "Well, first, Herr von Lenksering and Olga von Steinfels are betrothed, and second, we may expect a visitor." "Olga? Oh, that'll be lovely." "No, she has promised to come later, but tomorrow I think Dr. Olhart will be here." A blush of disappointment suffused Sibylla's face, while an inner terror convulsed her. "Dr. Olhart? What will he do here?" "Visit us. I've known him a long time and find him a very amusing fellow. He knows something about everything." "Yes, he is clever," Sibylla said, reluctantly. "Now see, that is what I think. I have a foolish lawsuit which must soon appear. It is somewhat peculiar, and I should like to be directed to a cautious attorney. I don't trust mine wholly. You say yourself Olhart is clever. And yet I wish he wouldn't cross our threshold. He will bring us no good fortune." "Ah, foolish one!" exclaimed Herr Bolton. "What have you against him? I could scarcely do otherwise if I wished. It might have been unfortunate for me if he had not so kindly and nobly assisted me once. And he is welcome, for in my affair with you, matters stood awry." Sibylla scarcely heard this latter. Should she tell her husband of Olhart's marriage proposal? She disliked to do so, since no such confidence had passed between them, and yet she would have waived this if she could have gained the slightest concession thereby. But she was certain that the affair must be struggled with alone, and that she must open her eyes to discover Olhart's real aim, for Sibylla knew he did not come to Larkau to gather flowers. The doctor came. He was apparently a guest too innocent and ingenuous to harm a child. He was as amiable here as he had always been in society at Berlin. The knife in his eye, a fine cigar in his mouth, he could recline for hours on the sofa and listen with undivided attention to the host's long drawn-out conversation about his worldly possessions, how he lived and increased his fortune, etc. Towards Sibylla, whom he had not met since the eventful Earl King scene at Carrings's, he was simply the old friend of the past who had never overstepped the boundaries which his position gave him. But she perceived clearly the special attention he gave to her, and keenly detected his piercing, ardent glance beneath the polished surface, while his presence became hourly more and more offensive. When neither he nor her husband gave any sign of departure after several days, and it seemed as if he expected to remain for weeks at Larkau, Sibylla overcame her scruples and imparted the marriage proposal to her husband, adding her discomfort at his insolence in entering her home and intruding himself there so long under the guise of a friend. Bolton laughed heartily. "My dear woman, do you think you have told me anything new? That child's play Ulhart confessed to me long ago. Besides, he never intended to be serious that evening. He had merely taken a glass too much."
Nothing can calm a woman's perturbed spirit sooner than the accusation of imagining herself to have been loved by a man who disowns the fact. When a young girl, Sibylla might have turned away without a reply, but as a wife she felt she must remain and defend herself. "Pshaw!" she said, "and do you believe that?" "He has given me proof which attests it. Know, my dear child, that when your mother lay ill and your giddy little head scorned me wholly, it was he who encouraged me to persevere and enabled me to obtain final victory. You see, I have good reason to be grateful to him." Sibylla winced. A light dawned upon her. She saw that when Ulhart found his own case hopeless, he had made every effort to unite her to a man who he well knew was to her as fire to water. But she controlled herself. It had always been a matter of surprise how well she was able to do this and wear a mask upon her face. This art she would now exercise, and Ulhart should not discover her unhappiness. She would be bright and alert in order that he should not observe the deception. It was, however, the torment of daily life to evince a happiness she did not feel, and her husband made the task so difficult. Many things she now permitted for the first time in order to conceal her annoyance from the watchful guest. Herr Bolton's behavior was at no time very circumspect, and often wholly coarse. Cultivated manner is so indispensable to make life agreeable. It presents so many different grades that are often unobserved, but which are always felt. And Ulhart, as well as Sibylla, had a fine appreciation for courtesies. One day both gentlemen were enjoying a siesta. Sibylla withdrew and gave orders to have the horse saddled, which she usually rode. The groom made excuses and said his master had left word that this horse should not be taken from the stable, as it had been ridden in the morning. But Sibylla desired to be alone, and only rode comfortably upon this special horse. She concluded not to ride far. A short ride would not matter. How delightful it was to be upon the back of this faithful creature, and to be away, far away from here. She had suffered so many wrongs on this very day, of which her husband had no suspicion, and she saw with terror the influence Ulhart exerted over his weak character. At times she was penetrated by the fear that he would use this unfortunate lawsuit in order to injure him financially. That he knew more of Herr Bolton's resources than she did also disturbed and annoyed her. Wrapped in these thoughts, she rode farther and farther before observing she was several miles from Larco. Then she perceived the horse to be slightly lame, and just as she had discovered it, he stumbled and fell with a broken knee. She dismounted skillfully, and while the poor creature made desperate efforts to rise, they were in vain. Sibylla looked anxiously for aid, but found herself in a wood, a forester's hut in the far distance. She hastened there, but the forester shook his head gravely when he looked at the prostrate animal. "It will be necessary to kill him," he said sadly. "Poor creature." Sibylla wept bitter tears as she threw her arms around the neck of this faithful creature, which she had loved better than anything at Larcow. The forester was ready to send his servant to Herr Bolton to announce the accident and to have a carriage sent immediately for his wife. Added to the grief over the loss of her horse were self-reproaches. Her husband had forbidden its use on this day, and yet she had done so. What did it avail that she had not intended to ride so far? She had no desire to palliate her fault. She had done wrong, and was ready to answer for it honestly and openly, and to beg her husband's pardon. That was her nature. The resolution was indeed difficult to carry out when she entered her own yard and was received by her husband and the doctor. How gladly she would have spoken to him alone, especially as she dreaded his reproaches. But after an instant's hesitation, she approached him and said, entreatingly, "Edward, do not be angry. I have done wrong. I will in future have more regard for your wishes. I am very, very sorry." "Well, the horse is worth at a low estimate $300. I am vexed, but I have promised not to be severe towards you. I was terribly angry, but he there," pointing to Ulhart, "has interposed a good word for you." Away flew all feelings of blame, all humility from Sibylla. She drew herself haughtily and said, "I scarcely thought to have needed his intercession with my husband." "Still, still," interrupted Bolton, "be thankful for it. You needed it." Reaching her own room, Sibylla fell on her knees, hid her face in her hands, and wept hot tears. She felt indescribably unhappy. This was one of similar scenes which were daily enacted. After some weeks the unwelcome guest took his departure, but the beautiful May that surrounded his arrival was gone, and hot summer had come. The relations between wife and husband also chilled after Ulhart's leave. The tender buds which had trusted themselves to the daylight had been blighted. Sibylla felt sick and wounded in heart, and her husband treated his wife with distrust. It seemed as though he were having more regard for his money. She saw stamped documents and heard the ringing of coin. When inquiring what they meant, he received evasive replies, but she overcame her scruples and asked again, as she felt sure Ulhart was interested and that much of her husband's business passed through his hands. "Women don't understand. These are men's affairs," he said. "But when I borrow money and give 5% for it and invest in stocks which yield 10%, the advantage is apparent."
Sibylla was silent. She did not understand exchange speculations, but she knew that while fortunes were sometimes easily made there, they were much easier lost. She asked herself whether Bolton had the shrewd perception, the fine calculation necessary to benefit by the constant rise and fall in stocks. And granted that Ulhart possessed this ability and directed everything, would he use it for her husband's emolument, or exercise it in order to ruin him, and her with it? This money question scarcely permitted Sibylla to sleep. "Edward," she ventured one day, "the overseer says we must have a new stable." "That is my affair, and he has no business to speak to you about it," was the non-assuring reply. "But you are here so seldom, always traveling, that you scarcely concern yourself with the farm." "Do you concern yourself about your own business?" he asked sharply. The question pierced. Sibylla realized that she had given offense and decided to mend matters. At another time she said, "Edward, we must have several new carpets. The old ones are threadbare. Let us get them before cold weather." "To the devil with your eternal wants," was Bolton's coarse reply. "I have no money." And, slamming the door behind him, he passed out. Sibylla had expected more from her cherished art in life. Things must be in a bad way for her husband to speak so. From this time forward a dense cloud hung over her young head, and she simply waited for the time when it should burst and the lightning strike the roof of her dwelling. To be poor and alone had seemed very hard 1 year ago, but to share poverty with a man she did not love made her shudder. She resolved, however, to trouble herself no more about money matters, but to economize in small ways, although she was not very efficient in bringing this about. She longed to find distraction in art, but she shrank from the vehement though mournful sound which the lightest call awakened. She could see and hear no prospect of relief. Ah, even to act nobly and conscientiously under these circumstances was difficult, nay, impossible. Then came a distressing rumor that a cattle plague had reached Larkoff. Herr Bolton turned pale when it became evident that pneumonia had appeared in all the neat cattle. Skillful physicians were summoned by telegraph. They came and shrugged their shoulders. The terrible disease was in his stables. Everybody fled from his estate and its vicinity. How easily this pest might be carried to the cattle in the village! Horrible stillness reigned over all, unbroken save for the pitiful lowing of the creatures who were sure to die. Men came from Berlin who bought the finest of the herd at unheard-of low prices. Cows perfectly sound, but they must be rapidly transported. And what precautions were taken to convey these splendid animals to the capital? A wide roundabout way must be taken, as no one would permit a passage through his fields.
Even on the railroad, upon which large separate apartments were constructed in special cars, straw was burned behind them. Fear and dread had taken possession of all. It was midnight. Sibylla could not sleep. She opened her window to see once more the beautiful creatures, so long the pride and joy of the farm. The servants ran and fro with lanterns. Yonder stood the dear, patient beasts, lowing mournfully through the night air. Once more the physicians made a careful examination and separated those who presented the slightest symptoms in order to have them immediately killed. Then the door opened, and the old housekeeper emerged in excitement and grief. She knew every animal. That rich milch cow was her joy, that stately ox yonder her pride. Wringing her hands, she ran hither and thither, prophesying the ruin of the estate. It was like a mother about to be separated from her children. Sibylla witnessed it all. The darkness of the night, the unearthly stillness with which the cattle were taken away on the straw, added to the grief-stricken old woman, filled her with dismay. It seemed also as if everything was going to destruction, and a night should come when she too would just as silently turn her back on Larkoff. These impressions were not so vividly painful the next morning, but stood before her like a confused dream. That it had not been a dream was evident from her husband's pale countenance. She longed to comfort him, to direct him to a brighter hope, but she did not believe her own words, and how could she administer them as consolation to another? The neat cattle was a heavy loss to the estate, and Herr Bolton appeared to find only at Berlin some solace for the affliction.
This marks the end of chapter 22. We now move into the next chapter of Sibylla's story, titled Jerusalem the Golden.
O Lord of light, steep thou our souls in thee, that when the daylight trembles into shade, and falls the silence of mortality, and all is done, we shall not be afraid, but pass from light to light, from what doth seem, into the very heart and heaven of our dream. R.W. Gilder. The air is heavy which we have breathed recently. Let us visit the sea, and survey there the pictures of love and peace which celebrate the coming of spring. It is the last on earth to one we know. Ingeborg has grown more and more feeble. The journey to Berlin and the exciting circumstances attending her return have exhausted much of her waning strength. But she is very happy. Wolf lives with Karen, it is true, but he is still near her and in consultation with the resident physician. They can do little for the sick girl. To watch over her condition and lighten her pain, Wolf may be instrumental. Ah, the hopes were idle which he and Captain Nilsson had entertained upon the completion of his studies when he should be able to cure Ingeborg. It had rather been that the feeble girl had rescued the strong young man. Wolf remained here because it was necessary for the restoration of his health. He had severe struggles. Besides the battle against temptation was the problem whether he should become a fisherman again as an expiation for the past. But of what avail would such a conclusion be now? Would not an expiation in spirit be better? An emulation of his mother's unassuming life be more useful in his former chosen calling to others? Therefore he decided to prepare for his examination in this quiet place. Ingeborg never thought the world could be so beautiful as this past year had been. She longed to go out on the water as before, to listen to the waves' melodies. The spring had appeared so timely as if for her sake. Leaning upon Wolf's arm, she is again on the beach, hearing the songs which she wished might lull her to eternal rest. Berlin lay like a dim picture behind her. She did not fear the people now. She had no resentment against them now. Nothing but compassion reigned in her heart.
If Wolf were only perfectly well again, she knew he would stand high above all those people. He dared not remain here, where so few would appreciate him. No more than a warrior might conceal himself in a hermitage before the advancing host. Wolf must go forth to battle, must save the poor, of whom she had seen so few, but concerning whom she had heard so much. He must help them out of their troubles in life to victory. Where he led, all should follow. In his ship, many would be taken, who without him would drift on the wide ocean of destruction. Yes, he should be the pilot to guide all to a haven of rest. Ingeborg wished now that she might live to witness all this, but she felt confident it would be accomplished, if Wolf's health were only restored. How should he regain it? Oh, if he loved God with all his heart, supremely, it would be well with him. The world would lie at his feet, and he would be happy. These were Ingeborg's musings. One day, as they sauntered to the beach, the sea lay before them as a great Aeolian harm, moved by the zephyrs. Wolf had brought a book to read to Ingeborg. On the frontispiece was a portrait of the author, beneath which were the words, "Let thy grace be sufficient to keep me from the world's allurements, and yet keep me here to lift it up to thee." "How beautiful!" exclaimed the invalid. "Oh, he must have been a grand man. What a handsome, earnest face! He resembles you." Wolf laughed. "Oh, all good people in your eyes bear a resemblance to me." "Oh, Wolf, if you are ever painted, you must have these words under the portrait." "Don't be foolish," replied the young physician. "That will never be. Besides, I should never write what I did not believe." "Now you could not, I know, but when the time comes, you will." "Do you think it will ever come?" "Very certainly." "When?" "I do not know. When you are good enough to love all men," said Ingeborg softly. There was an eloquent pause. "Please, Wolf, read now," she continued. If she had not been so ill, Wolf would never have been so indulgent. But how could he deny anything to the poor child whose days on earth were so few and numbered? He opened the book cheerfully and began to read. While he was reading, tender feelings were excited within him. The poetry made a deep impression on his heart. He was silent for a time, then asked, "Tell me, Ingeborg, what shall I do in order to be good?" "You must love God above all else," replied his companion. "What do you demand? Love begets love. If God rules over all, he has not favored me very much. He has taken from me everything upon which my heart leaned, mother, friends, honor, and soon you will be gone. He has given me restless struggles and longings without needful strength to attain the end. But I shall not complain against God. I blame only myself for the failure of my life but forgive me if I am not so strong in faith as you are."
While Wolf dilated thus upon goodness, his heart was occupied with one thought, Sibylla, and yet he had never mentioned her name to Ingeborg. "You must not talk so," said the latter, with tears in her eyes. "God has always loved you and guided you out of his great love." "Not to himself. No, there you mistake. Wolf, you will return to your father's home and then recognize that there is no place so beautiful. If you only knew how good he is," she exclaimed, with an expression of rapture that astonished her listener, and he made no reply. Many other times the two were thus together, and during some of them she read to him out of her dearest book. With that she was thoroughly familiar. She could give no learned explanations, but she had laid hold of the gospel with all her heart, and it escaped from her lips how Jesus loved her, how he healed here and comforted there, reproved this one and instructed that one, but loved all. "You see," she would continue, with an enthusiasm which seemed to be inspired,
While he forgave all the sins of his children, he said to them, "As the Father hath sent me, so send I thee into the world." And then he said, "I am not come to do mine own will, but the will of him who hath sent me. See, wolf, he also says to you to go into the world and do his will." The young man sat beside her and received the word, but it did not impress his heart. "Fallacies," he would have replied. But then if these fallacies make one so happy, was not the view he held cold and heartless, and one which he had never known to make anyone happy? Ingeborg seemed to divine his thoughts. "Wolf, this faith accompanied your mother through life and made her death peaceful. She was obedient and did what God sent her to do. It was such a beautiful death, Mother Esther's. How happy she must have been to rescue so many. I have often mourned because I have never been useful, never helped anybody. Oh, it must be blessed to save one soul. But the dear Lord has said to me, 'Be still, and let my grace be sufficient for thee.' And now I am more cheerful." Wolf was silent. There was no room here to resistance. As the end approached for Ingeborg, no one recognized it so clearly as Wolf. When the flowers she had planted so lovingly on Mother Esther's grave should have bloomed, then her time would come. And Ingeborg, too, was perfectly aware of it. But the longing for death and heaven which once possessed her had disappeared, although the fear of death was still absent. This life was now beautiful to her. Even this suffering was beautiful, she often thought. But she knew the life beyond was even more beautiful, and her heart rejoiced that it was so well with her, and that she was accompanied to the entrance with so much love, and that she would be welcomed at the portals of the eternal Jerusalem by eternal love. She arranged all her temporal affairs. After providing for faithful Johanna, she made Wolf sole heir to her not insignificant estate. Once she had decided to leave all to the poor, but Wolf needed it now, and in his hands it would bear rich interest for the sick and needy. He never dreamed of the fact, and Ingeborg rejoiced over the moment when he should discover it. Then he will be happy and think lovingly of me, to know how heartily I loved him. Then she distributed her personal treasures, articles which had become endeared by association, her jewels, her wardrobe. In them all she included so much love that the gifts were doubly valuable. There was no one of her acquaintances in the village without some evidence of kind remembrance. "Now I am ready. I have nothing more to do," she said to Wolf one evening. "I have given something to everybody, but you shall have the best. Whatever you give me is good, and I shall prize it. Will you really prize it and really make use of it? I will give it to you now. Tomorrow it may be too late." She lifted her Bible and handed it to Wolf with trembling hands. "It belongs to you now. It was the dearest of all my possessions." Wolf received it with deep emotion. "Thank you. I shall always value it as a treasure." "And read it?" asked Ingeborg earnestly. "Also that, for your sake." "Oh, Wolf, for my sake you will not read it long," she murmured. "How soon you will forget me. But only begin, and all will be well." Wolf opened it and found written in Ingeborg's plain script on the first leaf, "Let us love him, for he first loved us." After this she was unable to leave her coach. For hours she lay still as a child, gazing at her own folded hands. "What do you see on your hands?" said Wolf once. "I know that my Redeemer liveth, and that he shall stand at the latter day upon the earth. And though after my skin worms destroy this body, yet in my flesh shall I see God, whom I shall see for myself, and mine eyes shall behold, and not another." They could not enjoy very long conversations, for her breath was short, but she had a pleasant thank you for every service of love. She began now to grow impatient. "Will it be much longer?" she asked. "No, Ingeborg, you will be at rest soon," said Wolf tenderly. A mother could not have cared more affectionately for her than he. He realized that she had grown to his heart, and that her departure would make a void in his life.
But she would not leave him alone. Her words and the influence of her life would remain. Painful hours of suffering and care followed. Wolf bent over her. He could not understand why his rough hand agitated the delicate form of the dying one. He desired to alleviate, but did not succeed. "Oh God, help me," he groaned, unwittingly.
An expression of joy illuminated the sick one's face. "I am so happy," she whispered. "Ingeborg, you are happy now in this suffering?" "Yes." "Tell me why." "Jesus loves me, and he also loves you." Wolf started back. The evening shadows began to gather. Ingeborg slumbered lightly. Wolf informed Johanna that he would remain all night, and she must be in readiness to be called. "Comes he?" said the faithful servant. "Who?" "The bridegroom," she replied with tears. "No, death," responded Wolf. But still he lingered, although the sound of his wings was near. The air was oppressive in the room, and the dying one breathed with difficulty. Wolf opened a window. The darkness of night lay over the earth, unrelieved by a single star. He bent over her as her face now wore the impress of death, but he knew some hours might elapse before the final struggle. She opened her beautiful eyes. Oh, those deep blue, beautiful eyes, in whose depths Wolf himself now longed to gaze once more. No fever overclouded Ingeborg's mind, which was as clear as her vision. She recognized the watcher, and over her wan face played a smile. He endeavored to arrange her position more comfortably. Her eyes met his in a long, searching look. It was now her only language. Oh no, lightly, softly came the whispered words, "Wolf, please kiss me." He kissed her lips and eyes fondly. A rosy blush flitted over the sweet face. Then she smiled and fell asleep again. Wolf was unnerved. Clear as a flash of lightning, a revelation came of which he had not dreamed. Ingeborg loved him, not as a child, not as a sister, but with the whole strength of her being. He had been so accustomed to her for so long that he accepted her affection as a matter of course. The chaste bud of this womanly love had not unfolded itself in the sunshine of reciprocation and could never blossom in its blessed beams. Therefore, it had remained a bud. But in the hour of death, its sheath had unfolded and now lay as a flower, so beautiful, so pure, so sweet. Wolf sat motionless beside Ingeborg's couch. With anxious suspense, Johanna stood near. Would she waken again? Lightly and more lightly the breathing came and went. More still it became in the heaving bosom. Wolf's heart also stood still. There was a deep sigh, and Ingeborg was with him her soul loved even more than those she had left behind. Wolf remained at the bedside a long, long time. The pale, sweet face had lost its lines of pain and bore an expression of such joy and rapture that he was moved to ask again and again, "What dost thou behold? Why art thou so happy?" But the lips which had always been so ready to respond were silent. How strange that his thoughts should suddenly revert to the picture he had seen with Sibylla. That wild rider, with all his zeal, had not reached the goal of happiness. Sibylla, with her hungry heart, with her longings after joy and contentment, was unhappy. No one knew this better than he. And yet this child, so frail, so delicate, had not only always been happy, but was now enjoying its fruition. And Wolf? He hurried away. As he stepped from the dwelling, deep silence reigned around. The sea she had loved sang its old wind melodies. He sat down mechanistically in the old spot where they had often been together. The rosy beams of the morning began to gleam in the east. The shadows flew away before the coming day, like ghosts hither and thither.
The glorious sun arose and kissed the sea with a morning's greeting, and its waters blushed beneath the kiss and grew bright and joyous afar. The night was gone. A new day had dawned. Wolf covered his face in his hands and wept bitterly.
This is the end of Part 7. Sibylla's story continues, and we will carry on in the next video. Thank you for listening, and remember to subscribe to the channel for more content. See you in Part 8 of Sibylla's story.